Quentin Maddox stood in the Charleston courthouse expecting a standard day in trial work. As an experienced defense attorney, he'd walked these marble floors countless times. But this day was different. Before 7 minutes had passed, Judge Cassandra Holt slammed down her gavel, her sharp voice cutting through the air. Guilty. Because I say so. Shock rippled through the room. Quentin barely had time to register the injustice before federal agents burst through the double doors, their black suits like shadows in the brightly lit courtroom. They cuffed Holt mid-sentence. Her face twisted with disbelief as her fingers clung to the edges of her bench. Her eyes, venomous and piercing, locked on Quentin, and when she spoke his name, it wasn't a farewell. It was a threat. Quentin thought he had won, but that glare said otherwise. What had started as a simple case had now become an unstoppable nightmare, one that would follow him for years. Chapter 1. The trial begins. That morning, Quentin's polished shoes clicked against the marble, echoing through the century-old Charleston courthouse. His navy blue tie was neatly knotted against a starched white shirt, his weathered briefcase gripped tighter than usual. This wasn't just another case. He was defending Terrence Boyd, a 23-year-old black mechanic accused of stealing a car he'd bought with his own hard-earned cash. The evidence? A blurry security camera video showing a man in a hoodie and a single witness, a nervous gas station attendant who swore it was Terrence despite the poor footage. Quentin had seen these kinds of flimsy cases far too often, but this one weighed heavier. The whispers about Judge Cassandra Holt, a 63-year-old white woman who had ruled over this courtroom for more than 3 decades, were impossible to ignore. Her rulings left scars, especially on black defendants. Attorneys shared hushed warnings over cheap coffee in the courthouse cafeteria. Step into Holt's court, and you'd feel her judgment before you even spoke. Quentin crossed the threshold, feeling the history, the grudges, and the old wood pressing in on him. The gallery was half full, bored retirees, a few journalists scribbling in their notepads. Terrence sat at the defense table, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting nervously toward Holt's looming bench. She didn't look up when Quentin approached. Her fingers flipped through papers, silver hair pulled back into a severe bun that matched the strict lines of her black robe. Her reading glasses perched low on her nose, but her hawk-like hazel eyes peered at Quentin over the rims. "Mr. Maddox," she said without warmth, "don't bore me with your sob stories. We got a full docket." Her words hit like a slap. Quentin took a breath, steadying himself. He'd faced plenty of judges like Holt, those who saw his race before his resume, but Holt's disdain was palpable. Chapter 2. Fighting the Tide. Quentin's opponent was a young prosecutor named Travis DeWitt. His cheap suit strained across his shoulders, and he clearly leaned on Holt's favor rather than his legal skills. He opened with a speech framing Terrence as a repeat offender, a bold lie considering Terrence had no record. When Quentin addressed the jury, he spoke plainly. This isn't about facts. It's about assumptions. He pointed out the flimsy witness and grainy footage, appealing to reason. And for a brief moment, he caught a glimmer of empathy from a juror. But Holt's rulings crushed momentum. She sustained DeWitt's weak objections while dismissing Quentin's airtight ones. Her snide remarks weren't just sharp, they were personal. Chapter 3. Cracks appear. Despite the obstacles, Quentin landed blows. He introduced notarized proof that Terrence had bought the car legally. He exposed inconsistencies in witness testimony. Even Holt seemed rattled when a key piece of evidence contradicted the state's claims. But her control was ironclad. She cut off strong witnesses. She undercut testimonies. And when Terrence's boss, Miguel Ortiz, confirmed the sale, Holt dismissed him with a sneer. "You didn't see the title? Then your word means nothing." The day ended with Holt's gavel pounding like a war drum. Quentin packed his briefcase, his knuckles white. Chapter 4. The Arrest. On day 2, Holt entered like a storm cloud. She immediately mocked Quentin's defense. But he pressed on, calling Paul Granger, the shop owner who sold Terrence the car. Granger's testimony was rock solid, but Holt's response was venomous. "I don't trust his kind." The courtroom gasped. Quentin requested a sidebar. Holt denied it. He stood taller, his silence defiant. And then, salvation came from an unexpected source. 2 federal agents entered the courtroom with a warrant. Holt's face blanched as they announced her arrest: bribery, abuse of power, and civil rights violations. They cuffed her in front of everyone. As they led her away, she hissed Quentin's name. "You'll pay." Chapter 5, Fallout. At Maggie's diner, Terrence sat across from Quentin, his grin wide. "You're a legend," he said, passing Quentin a basket of fries. For a few hours, life felt normal. But Quentin knew it wasn't over. That night, his office burned. A brick with a note, courtesy of Holt's friends, lay in the ashes. The threats escalated, slurs painted on his car, bricks thrown through his window. Police filed reports, but took no real action. Chapter 6, Retaliation. The attack spread. Quentin's sister, Angela, barely escaped when her house was firebombed. The arsonists left a gas can in the bushes. The same cops dismissed it as an accident. Quentin received calls from block numbers. "Back off, or they're next." Chapter 7, Escalation. Quentin kept fighting. He went public, exposing Holt's network on live streams. Protesters rallied. Federal agents reopened cases tied to Holt. But Holt's allies struck back. Her nephew, Tommy Holt, led an attack that left Quentin battered in a courthouse parking lot. They framed him for the firebombing of Angela's house, had his law license suspended, and turned public opinion against him. Chapter 8, Turning the Tide Again. Quentin dug deeper, finding an old ledger that tied Holt to a hate group called Pale Dawn. He leaked it to the press. Rollins, a real estate tycoon, was exposed as her funder. The feds rearrested Holt. Nobody. Her network began to unravel. But her final play was brutal. She declared herself a martyr, claiming a black conspiracy had destroyed her career. White nationalists rioted, calling for her release. Chapter 9, The Sniper. During a protest, Quentin was shot by a sniper. A warning shot. The feds traced it back to Rollins' people. Quentin survived, but the message was clear: he wasn't safe. Chapter 10, The Rescue. They kidnapped Terrence, rigging him to a bomb in a warehouse. Quentin and the feds stormed in just in time, freeing Terrence as the building exploded behind them. Chapter 11, The Aftermath. Rollins confessed. Holt's empire crumbled. Her allies were jailed. Quentin's name was cleared, but Holt's lies had ignited something darker. Her supporters painted her as a hero, their chants echoing through Charleston. Quentin sat on the courthouse steps. He'd won, but the war raged on, and as he stared at a letter with her initials, Sich, he realized the fight was far from over. Epilogue, a legacy of resistance. Quentin's journey wasn't just about Terrence. It was about tearing down a corrupt system. He paid a high price, his practice in ruins, his family forever scarred. But his story was proof. Standing for justice demands resilience. Holt's gavel no longer ruled, but her hate left deep roots. Quentin knew winning one battle doesn't end a war, but he'd fight anyway. What's your take? Drop a 1 in the comments if you believe Quentin's fight was worth the chaos. Drop a 2 if you think Holt's revenge stole his victory. Hit that like button if this story got your blood pumping. Subscribe for more stories where justice battles the odds and sometimes wins.